want to welcome everyone to today's webinar on National RTAP's new Fundamental Financial Management training module. My name is Liz Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director here at National RTAP, and before we get started, I'm going to go through a few slides about how to use Zoom webinar. For audio, you can use your computer or you can use one of the phone numbers that are shown on the screen, and you will also use the meeting ID. Please use the chat function to get help during the webinar about using Zoom or to communicate with us or other attendees. Please use the Q&A function to submit questions for our speakers, which we will answer at the end of the webinar. And the slides and a recording of this webinar will be posted on our website within 1 week of the webinar. Here's our agenda for today. First, for those who are not familiar with National RTAP, I'm going to provide a very brief overview of our program. Then I will introduce our speakers and provide a little bit of background about the training and some acknowledgements for those who have worked on the training. Then our speakers will go over the overview of the content that's in the training, as well as how to access and utilize the materials. And then we'll take questions at the end. Okay, so again, for those who are not familiar with National RTAP, we are a technical assistance center funded by FTA through the Section 5311 program for rural areas. The program is managed by the Neponset Valley Transportation Management Association. We are located outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and we also have an office in Washington, D.C. We provide free training materials and technical assistance products and services to rural and tribal transit providers and state RTAPs. That includes some web-based applications, as well as technical briefs, toolkits, webinars on other subjects, not just on our trainings. And when we're not in a pandemic, we travel around to different conferences throughout the country. And you can learn more at nationalrtap.org to see our full suite of resources. We are also guided by a review board. They provide feedback on our products and making sure that we're producing things that are relevant to rural and tribal transit operators and state RTAP programs. So now I want to introduce our two speakers today. They were both involved in the development of the training module. So Richard Garrity, Senior Associate at RLS and Associates. Rich has over 40 years of experience in transit planning, operations and management evaluation, coordinated transportation services, policy development, and state DOT program management. He is an expert on all things related to financial management, cost allocation, regulatory compliance, and so much more. He's also a nationally recognized trainer. We are very fortunate to have had Rich have him document all his vast knowledge on transit financial management through the development of this manual and share it all with you. Todd Hansen, our other speaker is Todd Hansen, Assistant Research Scientist at Texas A&M Transportation Institute, or TTI. Todd's work focuses on best practices for public transit agencies and analysis and reporting of transit operational and financial data. Todd routinely assists transit agencies with reporting and benchmarking, developing fleet management plans, and training. He also conducts research on innovative transit practices. Todd has a master's in urban planning from Texas A&M University and is certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. And Rich and Todd also previously collaborated on the development of National RTAP's cost allocation calculator. So we look forward to hearing from both of them. But before we do, I'm going to just provide a little background about the training. So this new manual is based on a prior manual from 2006, which was also written by Rich Garrity and was sponsored by National RTAP in partnership with the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, their Multi-State Technical Assistance Program, or MTAP. And the new training was completely rewritten by Rich with significant new content added from his many years of working in the field with transit providers and state DOTs nationwide. Then researchers at the Transit Mobility Program at TTI contributed additional material from their Making Dollars and Sense of Transit Finance course. TTI also wrote 2 advanced topics chapters, which are currently under review, on service-based cost allocation and pricing and operating services under agreements with third parties. Those topics were set aside to be covered in greater detail because the training manual is already 260 pages. So we thought we would just separate those topics for those who are interested in those advanced topics. And also, we are hoping to create an e-learning version of this course in the future. I would also like to acknowledge the work of the National Review Board members listed here who helped review chapters and gave feedback on the outline in the development of the manual. And we also will have some other board members who are helping with the advanced topics, because the term of the board members is 3 years, and some of them have some new ones will be helping us with that. Okay. Before we get started, let me just do a quick poll to get a sense of our audience today. And let's see, so let me just launch this. So you should be able to see the poll now about your role at your organization. We'll leave it open for a few moments. Still getting a few more, so leave it open a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results, which are not surprising, so that's great. Okay. So now go back to the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Rich Garrity to talk about the content in the manual. Rich? And just make sure you unmute yourself.
Thank you, Liz. Good afternoon, everyone. The manual consists of a number of chapters, and it is designed based on the 2006 concept, and I'll give credit to some of the state DOT program managers who were instrumental in formulating the initial concept and defining the need for such a document and the resulting training course that was developed back in the day. We wanted to focus on requirements associated with financial grant management principles and how individual recipients of FTA financial assistance could improve the overall financial management and responsiveness to grant terms and conditions. And you'll see that many elements of the resulting manual and the update that we created and that we're releasing today is built around requirements that are imposed on any recipient of FTA funding. We focus not only on FTA requirements and have pulled out various key points from the multitude of FTA program circulars that are in existence, as well as build upon what is commonly referred to as the OMB Super Circular, sometimes referred to as the Uniform Guidance, or 2 CFR Part 200, and we have incorporated elements from all of those documents into the training in a manner that's hopefully easy to read and is appropriate for the skill sets of those individuals in rural and small urban transit agencies. Next slide. You'll see that we introduce in the beginning of the manual elements. Hopefully no one needs convincing, but we point out various factors that will impact the success or failure of any business enterprise, particularly one involved in the delivery of rural transit services. So we've gone beyond just the regulatory compliance elements to talk about other things such as auditing, financial reporting, as well as cash management and topics of that nature, to provide a well-rounded avenue for financial managers to build a good skill set in making sure that your respective transit agencies are a success. Next slide, please. And these are some of the key points that good financial management systems are built upon. In an era where we have limited financial resources, we have to make the most efficient and effective use of those resources. We often have to respond to the objectives and requirements established by outside stakeholders and our governing board members. We have to be accountable, for those of us in the nonprofit sector, to those who contribute to the financial status of our organizations. Good, sound financial management principles enable us to gain the respect and confidence of both the public and our governing board in our ability to successfully run the organization. And in an era where we have to compete against our fellow transit system for scarce resources, generally the better built the organization is in terms of its financial and technical capacity, the better off you will be in competing for those resources. And then finally, we've invested great sums of monies in our rolling stock, our facilities, and other capital equipment, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to protect those assets, keep those assets in a state of good repair, and that ultimately plays back to the financial management of the organization. So the organization of the manual introduces some of those basic concepts that I just talked about in the previous slide. We move right into the foundational elements of 2 CFR Part 200 and the uniform guidance. And we think this is really an important foundational chapter of the manual itself, in that it really lays the groundwork for whether it's a FTA grant or a grant funding source from any other agency, federal agency that your organization may receive. We're all playing by the same rule book. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of training in the area of how to implement 2 CFR Part 200 that's specifically directed at transit agencies. We hope to fill the gap with this manual and this training module. Foundational elements, we talk about the chart of accounts and how that accounts will serve the organization. We get into the more complex topic of direct and indirect cost, including indirect cost allocation. To a limited degree, we provide a basic understanding of what's included in that chapter and requirements for claiming indirect costs under your federal awards. We then migrate over to cost allowability principles under FTA grant awards. We talk about matching requirements and how you can match your FTA grant awards and how you can take advantage of some relatively unique federal grant management provisions that we have under transit legislation that makes our ability to match federal grant awards a little bit easier than some other federal grant programs. We talk about the role of contributions and donations in terms of agency budget and their ability to be used in part to match your FTA grant awards. We talk about cash management, National Transit Database reporting requirements for those of you who are rural reporters. And then finally, we talk about the audit requirements that is an expansion of the discussion of 2 CFR Part 200 as the audit requirements that we may be subject to if we meet the thresholds for preparing a single audit. We talk about that in our final chapter in the manual. Next slide, please. So in our introduction, we talk about the principles of why we are dedicating the resources of National RTAP in the promotion of sound financial management. We believe that it pays dividends in both the short term and long term in the operation of any rural transit agency. And we talk a little bit about the risks of insufficient internal controls and some of the things that can happen to you. I frequently note If any of you have ever attended any of my training classes, I have what's known as my wall of shame. It is a collection of anecdotal evidence of 5311 program managers who have been indicted for financial mismanagement. And in many cases, these are good people who have just run afoul of the rules. And what we hope to do here is to keep all of you from being in that situation. So we emphasize the importance of maintenance of sound financial management procedures for your organization in Chapter 1. Next slide. In Chapter 2, as I indicated, we really get into the meat of the super circular. It's approximately 100 pages, depending on your print format. It's fairly complex and it's difficult to understand. I don't know about you folks, but I know that reading 8-point font and multi-column text in the Federal Register isn't my idea of an easy read. It may be difficult to extract the things that you need to know. And what we've tried to do in Chapter 2 is that very thing, is let you know the major changes that went into effect December 26, 2014, that apply to your FTA grants, and tell you all the key concepts that you need to be aware of in order to adhere to those cost principles and grant management standards that are embodied in this uniform guidance applicable to most federal awards, I should say. Next slide. In our third chapter, we talk about the important role of the financial management system, internal controls, and the chart of accounts. Most notably, we talk about the uniform system of accounts, and this is something that may not be familiar to many rural transit agencies, as under NTD reporting requirements, we are only obligated to report total expenditures. Unlike our urban counterparts, we are not required to report our expenses on a detailed object-by-object basis. That is what the USOA does. And so for those of you who perhaps your origin, the genesis of your organization was not predicated on the provision of transportation services, perhaps you started out in some other human service agency role, I always recommend that you take a look at the USOA. It is a good accounting structure. It's been in place since 1985, and it's purpose-built for transportation accounting and can really help finance managers and transit managers build a chart of accounts that serves the needs of transit management. Next slide, please. In Chapter 4, we talk about the concepts of direct and indirect cost. As many of you know, most of us may incur indirect costs in the delivery of public transit services if we certainly work in a multi-purpose organization. However, we are limited in claims of those indirect costs under our federal grants to the extent that we have an approved indirect cost allocation plan that's been approved by a beast known as the Cognizant Agency for Indirect Costs. If we are a rural agency, typically referred to as a pass-through organization because we receive our money from a state DOT, it is feasible and permissible for the state DOT, in the absence of a federal agency approving our indirect cost plans, to serve in that role of cognizance and approve our indirect cost plans. So many of you may deal with your state DOTs or other agencies to review, approve your indirect cost rate proposals. We talk about the basic structure, what's required in an indirect cost allocation proposal, and given that we tend to be smaller organizations in the rural transit community, we may not have a designated cognizant agency. We talk about the steps you need to take to get someone to approve, or what you have to do with your indirect cost rate proposal in the absence of a federal cognizant agency. Next slide. Cost allowability standards are certain things that you can and cannot charge under your federal grant awards, and every finance department within every transit agency needs to know these claims. It will facilitate the invoicing process under your quarterly or monthly invoice claims process with the grantor agency. It will speed up that process during the state's review, and generally will result in cleaner audits to the extent that you have a good working knowledge on cost allowability principles that are articulated in 2 CFR Part 200.425 through 475. Further, there could be other limitations in FTA allowability which narrow the funnel, if you will, of allowable costs under your federal grant awards. And we talk about those principles generally articulated in the respective program circulars issued by FTA. Next slide, Liz. In Chapter 6, we talk about local match. Obviously, there's no substitute for local cash when you're talking about match to federal grant awards. However, as indicated earlier, we do have some statutory and unique matching provisions that give us the ability to use revenues derived from the provision of service under contract to other human service agencies to be used as local match to our FTA grant awards, even if the source of those contract revenues are other federal funds. And we also have special match provisions under the inner city bus program that can be a little bit complicated to understand. We provide some explanation and examples of 5311F program match as well in Chapter 6. In Chapter 7, we talk about the unique role of contributions and donations. We can never be reimbursed for something that we didn't pay for, a donation or a contribution. But the unique thing about such items is they can be used as local match. However, there are any number of caveats associated with the allowability of donations and contributions as local match, and we have to make sure that we meet all of those criteria in order to be able to count such donations as match. Chapter 7 reviews those various elements. In Chapter 8, we talk about cash management. We have a fiduciary responsibility and a requirement under 2 CFR Part 200 to protect all assets of the organization. Operating assistance is calculated on the basis of our total operating cost less revenue through the fare box. If we're not protecting those cash assets and we're underreporting fare box revenues, we may be overdrawing the amounts of operating and assistance that we're entitled to. So protection of those cash assets is critical to the health and well-being of any rural transit agency. And we talk a little bit about the internal controls to be able to demonstrate to the state DOT, to your external auditors, etc., how you treat your cash resources. In Chapter 9, we review National Transit Database requirements, how that database is used for allocation of FTA funds in part. We talk mostly about rural reporting requirements under the Section 5311 program, and we talk about some key reporting issues that may entail you to embrace various cost allocation methodologies in order to meet the reporting requirements of the NTD, and we do that in Chapter 9. And finally, in Chapter 10, we talk about the threshold requirements and when you must or are obligated to prepare a single audit, the $750,000 threshold that relates to expenditures incurred by your organization from all federal sources in your fiscal year. We talk about what must be counted and the development of something known as the CEFA, or the Schedule of Expenditure of Federal Awards, which is really what is used to determine whether or not the single audit requirements apply to you. We talk about various elements in the uniform guidance associated with the single audit. There are some procurement standards we all must be aware of that are discussed in Chapter 10, and we talk about the responsibilities of you as the auditee in preparing for that single audit. And that concludes Chapter 10.
Okay, thank you so much, Rich. That was really helpful. So now I'm going to turn it over to Todd Hansen to talk about how to access the training on our website, which hopefully is pretty easy, and also how best to utilize the materials. Todd?
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Liz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Looks like it. And thank you, Rich, for that introduction and summary of all the chapters. And it was great to work together on this to help finalize this manual. So as Liz mentioned, TTI was brought in to help assist with putting together the final manual materials, as well as the supplementary materials that can be used for instruction, either in self-instruction or through a guided instruction in-person course. So of the components, the way it's structured is we have the learner's guide, which is essentially the entire 260-page manual that has all 10 chapters that Rich just discussed included in that manual. With each chapter, there are quizzes that are associated with the chapter contents that can be followed along with, as well as in some cases we have additional resources for each chapter for references and materials that are referenced in the chapter, such as different trainings, different federal guidance requirements, and those things. We have additional resources at the end of each chapter, and then as applicable, we have appendices with additional either exercises or references to look at in the manual as well. At the end of the manual, there is a model chart of accounts, as Rich was mentioning, with the USOA standard accounts that can be used for your accounting structure. And so this model chart of accounts is a really useful resource that includes all of the USOA codes that are applicable to transit, and those numbers that can be used if you're needing that for reference with your accounting structure. There's a glossary that includes all the definitions and terms that are used throughout the manual. Quiz answers at the end, so if you use the manual quizzes in each chapter, we have the answers with a full explanation of why the answer is what it is, whether it's true, false, or otherwise. And then there are also class exercises, which are included in the manual, but then are connected to basically the instructor PowerPoint materials, and a overall references section of all the resources that are used in the manual. So that's everything that's included in the learner's guide for the manual PDF. In the instructor materials, there is additional files included, and when you download this, which I'll discuss in a second, you can either download it as a zip file with the PDFs in it, or you can order it on a disk to have all those files there. Within this download set, we have PowerPoints for each chapter that go along with each chapter flow, so they can be used by an instructor or helpfully summarize each of the page-by-page material that is in each of the chapters. Additionally, we have PDF slides that are the PowerPoint slides with a note section that can be used for printing with the handouts. There is a certificate of completion, so if you're doing this instruction and need that along with the course evaluation, we have that certificate and course evaluation PDFs there as well as part of the instructor materials package. So when you are on the National RTAP main page, it's pretty easy to get to. If you go to the top ribbon banner and hover over Resource Center, then click on Resource Library. That will take you to the Resource Library page where you can search for any of the materials and resources that RTAP has. Once you type in financial management into that Find and Access Resources blank and click Search, then that will take you to the page results with either the learner's guide or the instructor materials packages. And so this is what that section of the page will look like. So you can see those there. When we have the additional advanced topics chapters, those will be searchable as well through the financial management keyword in the title. So once those are available, you'll be able to search for them easily in the same way. And then you can see next to each of the material packages, you can either click that download icon with the down arrow on it to download either the PDF for the learners module or the zip file for the instructor materials, or if you want to order a hard copy or the disc, you can click on that shopping cart icon. And if you do that, you will need to log into your RTAP cloud account in order to complete the order. If you have any difficulties with ordering or downloading any of the materials, keep in mind at the top right of the RTAP page, there's contact information to speak with RTAP about by email, call, or chat, and make your request. And as far as how to utilize the training materials, as I mentioned earlier, the manual is really designed to be for a self-guided study resource. And so the way each of the chapters is structured along with the quizzes and any supplemental materials, exercises within, it's really designed to be used as a resource for self-study or with the additional materials if you want to lead an in-person instruction. As Liz mentioned earlier, there may be a developed online course later, but for now, the way the materials are, it's really for in-person delivery of some kind. With the chapter manual as well as the PowerPoints, it's really, as we mentioned, 260 pages, a lot of material, and so it's really suggested for an in-person delivery that about 2 days or 12 plus hours of training time would be needed to adequately cover all the content. And keep in mind also, we do have within the PowerPoints, we have instructor notes as well to follow along with each of the content, but we also recommend that any instructor who wants to deliver this as an in-person course should have familiarity with the content and topic area before going into the training.
Okay.
I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Todd and Rich. So now we did get a couple questions, and so I'll go through those, but again, feel free to type that into the question answer panel. And I'm just viewing that myself. So we did get, I'll start off with a couple easy ones. One is whether the presentation will be available, and I'm not able to share that right here with you. This is my first time using the Zoom webinar, and in our previous one, I could upload the slides, but I don't see how to do that right now. But we will be posting those on our website at nationalrtap.org/webinar, and we'll have a recording posted there soon too. And then we did get another question or suggestion maybe. From Rebecca about whether we had thought about collaborating with the National Council of University Research Administration on training and educating individuals on the uniform guidance and cost allocation. I can say I've actually never heard of that. So we thank you for that suggestion. Todd or Rich, have you heard of that, or any response to that question?
Yeah, I'm also, like you, Liz, unfamiliar with that organization, but I'll look into that as soon as the webinar's over.
Yes, thank you. Okay, here is a question. So with the handbook provided, are the updates recently released on 2 CFR 200 incorporated into this manual, or will they be soon? And Rich or Todd, could you speak to what those updates were? And I will say in general, we will be updating the manual as appropriate. And we printed a large copy recently, so we will have to wait unless it's a very significant change, which we could do like an insert or something, but we will generally be updating it over time.
Yeah, the initial rulemaking came out on December 26, 2013, and there was a 1-year implementation period with the effective date of December 26, 2014. In July of 2017, it wasn't necessarily a rule update, did not go through a public participation and comment process, but there were an official set of frequently asked questions that were issued, and the results of that FAQ, to the extent applicable, are embodied in the manual. There was, in January of 2020, a notice of proposed rulemaking, and I believe the public comment period closed in March of 2020 on changes to 2 CFR Part 200. I believe that with COVID and other national issues, I'm unaware that a final rule predicated on that notice of proposed rulemaking has been issued as of this time. When that does occur, we'll consult with National RTAP to determine whether or not anything in the manual needs an errata page or a correction page to reflect the updated guidance.
Thank you so much, Rich. Yes, exactly. And thank you for the question. I do have one other question so far, but feel free to ask any other questions you have. The question is, if time allows, could you elaborate on indirect cost plan guidance? So maybe just, Rich, you could speak a little bit more to what's in the manual, I guess, about that topic.
Yeah, because that could take the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a complex topic. Yeah, we talk about basically organizational approaches to the classification of cost as either direct, meaning that they can be billed directly to an individual federal grant award, or whether or not the level of effort necessary to allocate the cost as a direct expense is disproportionate to accounting benefits received and should go into an indirect cost plan. We talk about the elements that have to be prepared as part of an indirect cost rate proposal. We talk about who you submit those cost rate proposals to. We give some examples of some of the schedules that should be included in an indirect cost rate proposal. And we also talk a little bit about the de minimis rate, and we provide some examples of how to accurately calculate modified total direct cost, which is the allocation base on which the de minimis rate, or the 10%, is applied. Initial experience with agencies that have adopted the de minimis rate show that this represents a fairly easy way to obtain compensation for your indirect cost, but agencies are making mistakes in the way they accumulate and report their cost base in calculating total modified direct cost. And so the manual provides some tables and exhibits of how that is reflected. That's about the extent of it. If you're looking for more information on indirect cost rate proposal, we provide an overview, but not a step-by-step per se. That would be too complex for the intended purpose of this manual, but we could certainly talk to you further on that topic.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will go get back to my place in the slides. Okay, well, if you have any other questions later, please let me know. You can contact me at etaylor@nationalrtap.org. I'll share my information in a moment. But we're happy to answer any questions about the manual or, you know, with a question you have about a topic. And before I move on, I do want to mention that I spoke about briefly that Todd and Rich collaborated on our cost allocation calculator, and that is a tool that helps you. It's a 2-variable cost allocation calculator that can help you with allocating those costs. It's an Excel and Access tool that you can download from our website. And maybe you guys could just say something else about the tool and how you know, promote it a little bit. As always with all of our materials, everything is free of charge for you all to utilize.
Yeah, I would just mention for both the Access and Excel versions, those originally were launched last year around this time. And I believe last month or the month before, we put together an updated version for both Access and Excel. So that includes a lot of different features to make it a little easier on the user to edit data, as well as the reports that come out of it and the exports. For both versions, the reporting output features are really revamped now, and hopefully a lot more helpful for agencies using it. So I encourage people to go download it and check it out. Either version, they both do the same thing in terms of the system and taking your data and computing allocated costs to each of your routes and services. And we also have manual and webinar materials to help guide you through the data input process and what different things mean.
Perfect. Thank you,
And
Todd.
Liz, I see one other questions that we haven't addressed concerning intercity bus feeder service that I can quickly address. That the manual does have a table that illustrates the concept of intercity bus match. We talk a little bit about feeder service, but that's sort of getting a little far afield from manual topical coverage. I would recommend to this questioner that they refer to the intercity bus chapter in FTA Circular 9040.1G. And the second thing that I could recommend is if they're proposing to run feeder service and have that service funded under 5311F, they immediately, before they begin any service delivery, reach out to their state DOT and make sure that you're on the same page with respect to how the matching provisions for 5311 work under your grant agreements.
Thank you very much for answering that, Rich. Yes, I was going to get to that. And if you take a look at that circular that he recommended and you have additional questions, you can follow up with us at National RTAP. I would not be able to help you, but we have others on our staff who are familiar with the intercity program. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions at that time, but if you, as we wrap up, you shoot one more in, we could probably get to it. But we just want to quickly mention that when you end this webinar, I believe a tab will open up on your browser to complete a brief survey about the webinar. It should take you just a few minutes to complete. And as I said, if you have any questions about the manual or the webinar or anything, please contact me at etaylor@nationalrtap.org. And we really want to thank Rich and Todd so much for their work on this manual and for presenting today. And thank you all for joining us. Please visit our website for more information that we can and ways we can help you. And hope you all are doing okay, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much. And I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you. Goodbye.